On May 7th, 2018, in the Season 5 episode A Single Pale Rose, Steven Universe enters Pearl's gem and falls through layers of memory like sinking through water. Each layer is older, quieter, more guarded. And in the deepest one, in the silence at the bottom of everything Pearl has ever hidden, he watches rose quartz shapeshift back into pink diamond, swallow a handful of fake diamond shards, and order Pearl to never speak of what happened. The show had been building toward this moment for 5 years and over 160 episodes, and when it finally arrived, it did not feel like a twist, it felt like a confession. Pink diamond is what Nietzsche warned us about, and the show knows it. That is not a metaphor I am reaching for. It is not a clever reading layered onto a children's cartoon after the fact. The philosophy is already there, embedded in the structure of the character, in the shape of her choices, in the specific way she destroyed the people who loved her, while genuinely believing that she was setting them free. And if you sit with that long enough, if you trace the full arc of who Pink Diamond was and who she became and what she left behind, you end up somewhere that Friedrich Nietzsche mapped out more than a century ago. You end up staring at one of the oldest warnings in modern philosophy, dressed in pastel colors and aired on Cartoon Network. There is a particular kind of character that haunts fiction, the kind who does terrible things for beautiful reasons, and the usual approach is to resolve the tension. Either the beautiful reasons win and we forgive them, or the terrible things win and we condemn them. Steven Universe refuses both. It sits in the discomfort. It asks you to hold the contradiction without collapsing it into something simpler. And that refusal, that insistence on complexity, is what makes Pink Diamond one of the most philosophically rich characters in modern animation. She is not a puzzle to be solved. She is a warning to be understood. If you have been enjoying these long-form essays, subscribing to the channel genuinely helps us keep making them. It is free and it takes a moment. That is all. So let us start where Nietzsche would want us to start. Not with the rebellion, not with rose quartz, not with the war or the shattering or the lie. Let us start with the desire. The raw, inarticulate wanting that existed before any of those things had names. Nietzsche called it the will to power. And almost everyone gets it wrong. When people hear that phrase, they picture conquest. They picture dictators and warlords and corporate executives stepping on throats. They hear power and they think domination. But that is not what Nietzsche meant, or at least it is not all he meant, and the distinction matters enormously when you are trying to understand Pink Diamond. For Nietzsche, the will to power was not primarily a desire to control other people. It was the fundamental drive of all living things toward growth, toward self-expression, toward self-overcoming. It was the force that makes a seed push through concrete, the impulse that makes an artist destroy a finished painting and start again because it is not honest enough yet. It was the philosopher's answer to a question that most people never bother to ask, which is not what do people want, because that changes from moment to moment, but why do they want anything at all? What is the thing beneath the wanting? What is the engine that never stops running even when every particular desire has been satisfied? Nietzsche's answer was that life itself is a process of reaching beyond what it currently is, not the will to survive, which is too passive, too defensive. Not the will to be happy, which is too vague and too easily satisfied by comfort, but the will to become more, to impose form on chaos, to take the raw, meaningless material of existence and shape it into something that matters. That is the will to power. It is not the will to have power over others. It is the will to have power over yourself, over your circumstances, over the story of your own life. And it operates in everyone all the time, whether they recognize it or not. And Pink Diamond, from the very beginning of her existence, was nothing if not a creature of wanting. We see this most clearly in the episode Jungle Moon, where Stevonnie falls asleep on an alien world and dreams Pink Diamond's memories. The sequence is filtered through a dream, distorted and layered with Stevonnie's own experiences, but the emotional core is unmistakable. Young Pink Diamond is small. Not just young, but physically smaller than the other diamonds, and in a society built entirely on hierarchy and scale, where your size literally corresponds to your authority, that difference is not cosmetic. It is existential. It is a verdict written into her body. She presses her face against the glass of Yellow Diamond's control room and stares out at a colony being built, an entire world being reshaped according to Yellow's design. And she wants one. She does not just ask politely and accept the answer. She demands. She throws a tantrum so forceful it cracks the glass beneath her fist, and Yellow Diamond's response is not anger, exactly. It is something worse. It is patience, the kind of patience you show a child who does not yet understand that wanting something does not mean you are ready for it. Pay attention to what that tantrum actually represents, because it is easy to read it as mere immaturity, and the show is counting on you to do exactly that at first. On the surface, it looks like a spoiled child demanding a toy. But underneath that surface, something more primal is happening. Pink Diamond is not just asking for a colony. She is asking to participate in the fundamental activity of her kind. Diamonds colonize worlds. That is what they do. That is the purpose encoded in their existence. And she is being told, through Yellow's patience and Blue's coddling and White's silence, that she is not enough. That she is a diamond who is not yet a diamond. That the thing she was literally created to be is something she has not yet earned the right to become. And for a being whose entire civilization is built on the idea that your purpose is determined at creation, that message is not just frustrating. It is ontologically devastating. It is being told that you are broken at the level of your own nature. That scene tells you everything about the world Pink Diamond was born into, and everything about how she experienced it. The Diamond Authority was a rigid caste system, a civilization built on the premise that every being has a fixed purpose determined at creation. You are made to be a soldier, so you fight. You are made to be a servant, so you serve. You are made to be a diamond, so you rule. There is no mobility, no self-determination, no possibility that you might be something other than what you were designed to be. The system is total. And within that system, Pink Diamond occupied the strangest possible position. She was at the top of the hierarchy by birth and at the bottom of the top by treatment. Blue Diamond coddled her, wrapping her in a protective affection that was also a kind of cage. Yellow Diamond dismissed her, treating her enthusiasm as evidence of immaturity rather than capability. White Diamond, the oldest and most powerful of them all, barely acknowledged her existence. Pink Diamond was royalty, yes, but she was royalty the way a youngest sibling is royalty in a family that has already decided what matters. She had the title but not the authority, the name but not the respect. And that gap, that maddening gap between what she was told she was and what she was allowed to be, is the crack through which everything else eventually poured. Pink Diamond did not turn inward. Not at first. She pushed outward, she demanded. She threw tantrums, she made herself impossible to ignore. And eventually, the other diamonds gave her what she wanted. They gave her Earth, a colony of her own, a world to shape according to her will, to prove that she was capable of the things she had been created to do. And this is where the story gets complicated in ways that resist any simple reading. Because what happened next was both the most genuine thing Pink Diamond ever did and the most self-serving thing she ever did. And the show is remarkably, almost painfully honest about the fact that those two things are not mutually exclusive. That a single action can be driven by compassion and ego simultaneously. That the desire to do good and the desire to be seen doing good can share the same heartbeat. In the episode Now We're Only Falling Apart, Season 5, Episode 19, Pearl tells Sapphire the story of how the rebellion began. It is one of the most important episodes in the series because it strips away the mythology that has accumulated around Rose Quartz and shows the raw, unvarnished origin of everything that followed. And the origin is not strategic. It is not ideological. It is not a carefully planned revolution against an unjust system. It is personal. It is a moment. Pink Diamond arrives on Earth to begin the colonization process, and she sees organic life for the first time. Not in an abstract intellectual way. She sees it up close. She sees plants growing from soil, creatures moving with purposes she cannot predict, an ecosystem operating on principles that have nothing to do with function or caste or predetermined roles. She sees life that exists not because it was designed to serve a purpose, but simply because it exists, and she is moved by it. Genuinely, deeply, transformatively moved. She does not want to destroy this. She does not want to hollow out this planet and turn it into another factory for producing gems, another colony stripped of everything that makes it alive. She wants to protect it. She wants to let it be what it is. And in that moment, that first encounter between Pink Diamond and the messy, unpredictable, purposeless beauty of organic existence, something fundamental shifts inside her. Something that will eventually become a war, a faked death, a new identity, a rebellion, a legacy, a son, and 1,000 years of consequences that no one involved will fully understand until it is far too late. And that impulse, that initial impulse to protect, is beautiful. It is one of the most Nietzschean things she ever does, in the truest and most generous sense of the word. Because Nietzsche's vision of the higher individual was not someone who conquered and destroyed. That is the caricature. The real vision was of someone who could look at the world in all its chaos and impermanence and suffering and say yes to it. Someone who could affirm life without needing to reduce it to a system, without needing to justify it through some higher purpose, without needing to impose meaning from outside. Just yes, this is alive. This is real. This is worth something because it exists, not because it serves me. Pink Diamond looked at Earth and arrived at that affirmation. She saw something worth preserving, not because it served her empire, not because it made her powerful, but because it was alive, because it was beautiful, because it did not need a reason to exist, and she chose to protect it. But here is where the warning begins. Because Pink Diamond did not simply protect Earth. She could have tried to convince the other diamonds through the channels available to her. She could have made her case within the system, argued for Earth's preservation using the authority she actually had, limited as it was. And in fact, she did try this, briefly. The show makes a point of showing us this. She asked Blue Diamond for help. She pleaded with Yellow Diamond to spare the planet. She tried to work within the structure. And she was told no, firmly, dismissively, with the same patronizing patience that had defined her entire relationship with the other diamonds. No, Pink, you do not understand how things work. No, Pink. A colony is more important than whatever you think you saw down there. No, Pink. You are still a child, and children do not get to override the judgment of their elders. And the moment she was told no, something shifted. Something subtle but decisive. The desire to protect Earth, which was genuine, became entangled with something older and deeper and harder to see. It became entangled with the desire to matter, to be taken seriously, to prove once and for all that she was not the child they all believed her to be, that her judgment was valid, that her vision was real, that she was capable of something the other diamonds could not even imagine, which was the ability to see value in something that did not serve the Empire. The rebellion was born not purely from compassion, but from compassion fused with wounded pride. And that fusion, that alloy of genuine altruism and genuine ego, is the most dangerous compound in the Nietzschean universe. Because Nietzsche did not just describe the will to power, he also described in extensive and often uncomfortable detail what happens when it operates without honesty, without discipline, without the willingness to look at yourself clearly and accept what you see. He described people who tell themselves noble stories about their own motivations, while the real engine driving them remains hidden, even from themselves. He saw this as one of the most human things there is, this capacity for self-deception, this ability to construct a narrative about yourself that is flattering and coherent. And he did not mean it as a compliment. He meant it as a diagnosis. The human being, Nietzsche argued, is the animal that lies to itself more skillfully than it lies to anyone else. Pink Diamond created rose quartz, and in Nietzschean terms, this is self-overcoming made literal. This is a being looking at what she was made to be, the purpose encoded in her very existence, the identity assigned to her by a civilization that does not believe in the possibility of becoming something other than what you are, and rejecting it completely. Not modifying it, not negotiating with it, annihilating it and creating something new in its place. The caterpillar does not choose to become a butterfly. The process is automatic, determined, built into the biology. Pink Diamond chose to become rose quartz. She looked at the rigid, predetermined identity that her civilization had assigned her, and she said, no, not this. Something else, something I build myself, from nothing, with no blueprint and no permission and no guarantee that it will work. That is extraordinary. It is also, and this is the part that matters most, profoundly dishonest. Because Pink Diamond did not overcome herself. She hid herself, and there is a difference between those two things, and it is the difference between Nietzsche's ideal and Nietzsche's warning, between the version of self-creation he celebrated and the version he diagnosed as sickness. The genuine self-overcomer, the person Nietzsche actually admired, the person he sometimes called the Übermensch, and sometimes described in less grandiose terms as simply someone who is honest, does not run from what they are. They confront it, they wrestle with it, they take everything dark and difficult and contradictory about their own nature, and they do not pretend it does not exist. They integrate it, they transform it. They make it fuel for something greater, not by denying it, but by passing through it. That is what self-overcoming means. It means you go through yourself, not around yourself. It means the new version of you contains the old version, acknowledged and digested and transcended, not buried alive in a shallow grave where it can still move. Pink Diamond went around. She took everything she did not want to face about who she was, her privilege, her power, her centuries of complicity in the system she now opposed, the colonizations she had wanted so desperately to participate in before she changed her mind. And she buried it inside a new shape. She did not stop being a diamond. That is the crucial point. She did not lose her diamond powers, or her diamond authority, or her diamond capacity to command obedience. She stopped being visible as one. She stopped being recognized as one. And that distinction between no longer being something and no longer being seen as something haunted every relationship she ever had for the rest of her existence. Pearl knew. Pearl was there when the transformation happened, there in the most intimate and terrible sense. She helped Pink Diamond stage her own shattering. She stood on that palanquin and caught the fake shards and watched the being she loved and served and was terrified of disappear into a new shape. And then she was ordered, and this word matters more than almost any other word in the entire series. She was ordered to never speak about it. Not asked, not requested, not persuaded through argument or appeals to loyalty. Ordered, and because of the nature of gem hierarchy, because Pearl was made to serve and Pink Diamond was made to command, because that power dynamic was built into their very gems at the moment of their creation, that order was not just a request between friends. It was a compulsion written into Pearl's being. She physically could not tell anyone the truth. Her hands would fly to her mouth every time she tried, covering the words before they could escape, her own body enforcing a command given by someone who no longer admitted to having the authority to give it. For thousands of years, Pearl carried the secret of who Rose Quartz really was. She carried it through the war, through the centuries of peace that followed, through Greg, through Stephen's birth, through Rose's death, through every moment when the truth might have changed everything and she could not speak it. And she carried it not by choice, but by command. That is the fact that makes everything else unbearable. Not that Pearl kept a secret, which might have been loyalty, which might have been a choice made freely and maintained through devotion, but that she was never given the option. The decision was made for her by someone who had renounced her authority using the very authority she had renounced. Nietzsche wrote about this too, with characteristic precision. He wrote about the danger of the ascetic ideal, the person who renounces power while still exercising it, who claims to have transcended their nature while their nature continues to operate beneath the surface, who wears the clothing of humility while the body underneath is still capable of everything it was always capable of. He saw this as one of the deepest forms of self-deception, because it allows the individual to feel virtuous while causing harm. The ascetic says, "I have given up power," and because they believe it sincerely, they never examine the power they still hold. They never interrogate the ways in which their renunciation itself is an exercise of will, an imposition on others, a demand that the world rearrange itself around their new identity. The ascetic does not become powerless. The ascetic becomes powerful in a way that is now unaccountable, because no one, including the ascetic, believes the power is still there. Pink Diamond gave up her throne, she gave up her colony, her authority, her place in the diamond hierarchy. She staged her own death so convincingly that the remaining diamonds, the three beings in the universe who might have recognized what she had done, believed it completely. Blue Diamond collapsed into a grief so total that it emanated from her body as a physical force, affecting every gem in her vicinity, drowning entire courts in sorrow. Yellow Diamond hardened. She became cold, efficient, merciless, channeling her pain into productivity and her grief into rage, cracking down on anything that reminded her of what she had lost. And White Diamond, the eldest and most powerful, retreated into a delusion of perfection so complete that she sealed herself away for millennia, unable to process the idea that something in her domain could be destroyed without her consent. And in the midst of all that wreckage, all that grief radiating outward through an empire like cracks, spreading through glass, Rose Quartz stood on Earth and built a new life. She gathered the crystal gems around her. She told them they were free. She created a community based on the radical idea that a gem could choose to be something other than what she was made to be. And every single one of those gems believed her, because Rose Quartz was compelling and kind and genuinely, undeniably caring. She was not faking the compassion. That is what makes this so impossible to resolve into a simple judgment. The compassion was real. The love was real. The belief in freedom was real. And underneath all of it, unacknowledged and unconfronted, was the lie. Garnet joined the rebellion because Rose Quartz looked at her, a fusion between a ruby and a sapphire, something that Homeworld considered an abomination, and said, "You are something entirely new. You are not wrong. You are extraordinary." And Garnet believed her. Ruby and Sapphire stayed fused because Rose Quartz made them feel that their existence was not an error but a revolution. And they never knew, not for thousands of years, that the person who told them this, the person who gave them permission to be what they chose to be, was herself a lie. That Rose Quartz was a costume worn by the very kind of authority figure the rebellion was supposed to be against. The layers of irony here are almost unbearable when you sit with them long enough. And the show does sit with them. That is what makes Steven Universe remarkable as a piece of storytelling. It does not let Pink Diamond be a villain. It does not let her be a hero. It holds her in the space between, in the vertigo of a character who is simultaneously the best thing and the worst thing that ever happened to almost everyone she touched. And that space between, that refusal to resolve, is exactly where Nietzsche said the most interesting and most dangerous people live. Not in the territory of good or evil, which is simple, which is manageable, which lets you sleep at night. But in the territory of beyond good and evil, where the categories themselves stop working and you are left with nothing but the raw, uncomfortable truth of a being who cannot be reduced to a moral judgment, Rebecca Sugar, the creator of Steven Universe, has spoken about this directly in interviews. She described Pink Diamond as intentionally so complicated and morally gray that whenever the character might appear totally good or totally bad, the creative team deliberately turned away from that. They refused the easy reading. They refused to give the audience the satisfaction of a clean verdict. And that refusal is itself a Nietzschean move, whether Sugar intended the reference or not. Because Nietzsche had despised comfortable moral judgments. He saw them as the refuge of people who did not want to think, who preferred the simplicity of good and evil to the vertigo of actually looking at a human being and seeing everything at once. The beauty and the destruction and the self-deception and the genuine love, all occupying the same body, all flowing from the same source. Pink Diamond wanted to save Earth. That is true. She wanted to protect organic life from the machinery of gem colonization, wanted to preserve something beautiful and chaotic and alive. That is true. She inspired a rebellion that gave hundreds of gems the freedom to choose their own identities, to become something other than what they were made to be, to discover that existence does not have to be a sentence. That is true. And she lied to every single one of them about who she was. She imprisoned Pearl in silence. She abandoned Spinel in a garden with the instruction to stand very still and wait. And Spinel waited for 6,000 years, alone, not understanding why the person she loved most in the universe never came back. She left behind a trail of grief so vast that it corrupted 3 of the most powerful beings in existence for millennia, each of them processing Pink's death in ways that caused immeasurable suffering to everyone beneath them. The will to power, Nietzsche said, is the engine of all great achievement and all great destruction. It is the force that builds civilizations and the force that burns them down. It is the drive that makes someone create a masterpiece and the drive that makes someone destroy the people closest to them without ever understanding why. It is not good or evil. It is energy, it is life itself, raw and undirected, and what it becomes depends entirely on whether the person wielding it is honest enough to see what they are actually doing with it. The will to power that knows itself can create extraordinary things. The will to power that hides from itself leaves devastation. And so she did what Nietzsche said people always do when they cannot face their own complexity. She created a story, a simple, beautiful, coherent story. Rose Quartz, the rebel leader, the protector of Earth, the gem who gave up everything for love and freedom and the right of every being to choose their own path. And she lived inside that story so completely, so totally, so without reservation, that it became, for everyone who knew her, the only truth there was. The story was warm and it was brave and it made everyone feel like they were part of something meaningful. And underneath it, like a body buried beneath a house, was the truth that no one was allowed to see. Until Steven entered Pearl's gem and fell through the layers. Until he sank through memory after memory, each one older and more guarded than the last, until he reached the very bottom, the place where Pearl kept the thing she could not speak. And there, in the deepest silence, he found it. The memory of a diamond putting on a mask and calling it liberation. The memory of power renouncing itself without ever actually letting go. The memory that changed everything, not because it revealed a villain, but because it revealed something much harder to process. A person who did terrible things for beautiful reasons and beautiful things for terrible reasons, and could not tell the difference between the two because she never once stopped long enough to look. That is where Nietzsche's warning lives. Not in the will to power itself, which is neutral, which is just the engine of being alive, the force that makes anything happen at all, but in the refusal to look at what the will to power is actually doing when it operates through you, in the preference for a beautiful story over an honest one, in the conviction that you have overcome yourself when all you have really done is hide, in the belief that renouncing your name is the same as renouncing your nature, that changing your shape is the same as changing your soul. Pink Diamond hid for thousands of years, and the wreckage she left behind, the grief, the silence, the lies compounding on lies, the son who inherited all of it without any of the context needed to understand it, that wreckage is not the failure of a villain. It is the failure of someone who wanted so badly to be good that she could not bear to see the ways she was not, and Nietzsche would have recognized her immediately. He would have looked at Pink Diamond and seen the archetype he spent his entire career trying to warn us about. The person who mistakes self-creation for self-knowledge. The person who builds a new identity on top of an unexamined one and calls it freedom. The person who runs from power and, in running, wields it more destructively than if they had simply stayed and faced what they were. So let us talk about power. Not power as you usually hear it discussed, not political power or military power, but power as a moral category. Power as the thing that decides what is good and what is bad. Because that is what Nietzsche was really interested in. He looked at the history of human civilization and he saw something that most people would rather not think about. He saw that morality, the whole system of right and wrong that we take for granted, did not fall from the sky. It was invented, and the people who invented it did so for reasons that had very little to do with truth and everything to do with who was winning. This is the argument that made Nietzsche dangerous. Not his atheism, not his mustache, not the fact that he eventually lost his mind. What made him dangerous was this simple observation. The people who get to define good and evil are the people who have the power to enforce those definitions. Morality is not discovered, it is imposed. And if you trace any moral system back far enough, you will find at its root not a universal truth, but a power structure. Someone benefits from these rules. Someone always benefits, and the people who benefit the most are usually the ones who get to pretend that the rules are simply natural, simply obvious, simply the way things are. That is the genius of moral systems. They hide their origins. They present themselves as timeless truths when they are actually historical inventions. And the most powerful moral systems are the ones that have hidden their origins so thoroughly that no one even thinks to question them anymore. Nietzsche divided the moral world into two camps. He called them master morality and slave morality, and the names alone tell you most of what you need to know. Master morality is the morality of the strong. It is the value system created by people who are on top, who have power, who define the world through their own experience of dominance and conquest. In master morality, good means noble, powerful, life-affirming. Bad simply means weak, common, pitiable. There is no guilt in master morality. There is no sin. There is only strength and the absence of strength. The strong do not need to justify themselves. Their existence is its own justification. They create, they expand, they impose their will on the world, and they call this good because it feels good to them. That is the whole system. It is elegant in its brutality. Now think about Homeworld. Think about the Diamond Authority. Think about that towering mural of 4 figures presiding over an empire that spans galaxies. What you are looking at is master morality made architectural. The diamonds do not question whether conquest is right. They do not wonder whether colonizing planets and draining them of life is morally acceptable. It simply is what they do. It is what they are. The strong expand, the strong create. The strong define the purpose of everything beneath them. Yellow Diamond manages armies and infrastructure with ruthless efficiency. Blue Diamond maintains order through emotional control. White Diamond, the oldest and most powerful, barely even acknowledges the existence of beings beneath her. She does not need to justify her authority. Her authority is self-evident. She shines, and everything else exists in her light. A gem that cannot perform its function is defective, and defective gems are destroyed, not punished, not rehabilitated, not given a second chance or a different assignment. Destroyed. Shattered into pieces and discarded, because in master morality, weakness is not a tragedy. It is simply worthless. There is no pity in this system. Pity would require the strong to look down at the weak and feel something other than contempt. And master morality does not traffic in those emotions. The weak exist only insofar as they are useful. When they stop being useful, they stop existing. And if this sounds harsh, if this sounds alien and monstrous, consider how many real human systems have operated on precisely this principle. Consider how many civilizations have discarded the disabled, the different, the ones who do not fit neatly into the categories that power has created for them. Consider how many societies have told their members that your value is your function, and if you cannot function, you have no value. Homeworld is not as alien as we would like to believe. It is our own history stripped of its rationalizations and projected onto a screen, dressed in bright colors and gemstone metaphors so that we can see it clearly for perhaps the first time. This is the world Pink Diamond was born into, or emerged into, rather. She came into existence inside a system that had already decided what power meant, what goodness meant, what purpose meant. And for a while she accepted it. Of course she did. She wanted a colony because that is what diamonds do. She wanted to be taken seriously by yellow and blue and white because their approval was the only measure of value she knew. She was, in every meaningful sense, a product of master morality. She believed in the system because the system was the only reality available to her. She had never seen an alternative. She had never even imagined that an alternative could exist. But something shifted, and this is where Nietzsche becomes genuinely useful for understanding Pink Diamond, because what happened to her maps almost perfectly onto what Nietzsche described as the slave revolt in morals. It is one of the most important ideas in his entire body of work, and it goes like this. At some point, the people on the bottom, the weak, the oppressed, the ones who cannot compete in the game of strength, they do something remarkable. They do not simply accept their place. They do not quietly endure their suffering and wait for things to improve. Instead, they invert the entire value system. They take the qualities that made them weak, their suffering, their humility, their powerlessness, and they redefine those qualities as virtues. The meek shall inherit the earth. The last shall be first. Poverty is noble. Power is corrupt. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the persecuted. The entire moral universe gets turned upside down, and suddenly the people on the bottom are not just unfortunate. They are righteous. This is a radical claim. It is also, if you think about it honestly, a deeply uncomfortable one. Because what Nietzsche is saying is that the moral values most of us hold dear, compassion, humility, concern for the weak, solidarity with the oppressed, these are not simply good in some absolute sense. They are strategies. They emerged not from a disinterested pursuit of justice, but from the specific historical experience of being dominated. The weak invented a morality that made weakness virtuous, and over time, that morality became so deeply embedded in our culture that we forgot it was invented at all. We think compassion is natural. We think caring about the vulnerable is just obviously right. Nietzsche says no, it is a choice, and it is a choice that was made for very specific, very human, very self-interested reasons. Nietzsche saw this happening throughout history, most dramatically in the rise of Christianity, which he argued was the greatest slave revolt in morals the world had ever seen. The Roman Empire, the ultimate expression of master morality, was gradually consumed from within by a religion that said the powerful were wicked and the meek were blessed. And it worked. The slaves won, not through force, but through the far more powerful weapon of moral redefinition. Pink Diamond does exactly this. She arrives on Earth to run her colony, and she encounters life. Not gem life, which exists to serve a function, but organic life, which exists for no reason at all. Humans who are born and die within a span of decades. Creatures that have no predetermined purpose, no assigned role, no cosmic hierarchy telling them what they are worth. And something about that randomness, that freedom, that beautiful pointlessness captivates her. She begins to see the things homeworld dismisses as worthless, humans, organic life, defective gems, unsanctioned fusions, and she redefines them as precious. The weak become the ones worth protecting. The outcasts become the ones worth fighting for. Power becomes something to be questioned rather than celebrated. The whole diamond value system gets inverted, and Pink is the one holding it upside down. This is the slave revolt. This is the moment when the value system flips. And if you are sympathetic to Pink Diamond, if you find her story moving and her transformation admirable, then you are responding to exactly what Nietzsche warned about. Because here is the thing he insisted on, the thing that makes his philosophy so uncomfortable. He did not think the slave revolt was simply good. He thought it was understandable, even inevitable, but he also thought it was dishonest. And the reason he thought it was dishonest has everything to do with a word he borrowed from the French: ressentiment. Ressentiment is not just resentment, although it includes resentment. It is something deeper and more corrosive. It is the feeling that arises when you are powerless and you know you are powerless and you cannot do anything about it. It is the slow poison of impotence. The fox who cannot reach the grapes and decides the grapes must be sour. But it goes further than that. Ressentiment does not just sour the grapes, it builds an entire moral philosophy around the idea that grapes are bad, that wanting grapes is corrupt, that the people who can reach the grapes are sinful precisely because they can reach them. And what it does, according to Nietzsche, is it transforms your inability into a moral position. You cannot be strong, so you declare that strength is evil. You cannot win the game, so you declare that the game itself is corrupt. You do not overcome your situation. You redefine it as virtue. Now think about Pink Diamond again. Think about why she rebelled. Yes, she was moved by the beauty of Earth. Yes, she genuinely cared about the life she found there. But that is not the whole story, is it? Because before she ever set foot on Earth, before she ever saw a human being or marveled at the organic world, she was already frustrated. She was already angry. She was the youngest diamond, the smallest, the one who was not taken seriously. She asked for a colony and was dismissed. She pleaded with yellow and blue and was patronized. She threw tantrums and was told to behave. She wanted desperately to matter in the way the other diamonds mattered, and she was told again and again that she was not enough. Not big enough, not serious enough, not diamond enough. She was treated like a child playing at being an adult, like someone whose desires were cute but never consequential. And that kind of dismissal, that particular flavor of being told you do not matter by the people whose opinion matters most to you, it leaves a mark. It leaves a wound that does not heal cleanly. It festers. It turns into something. That wound matters. You cannot understand Pink Diamond's rebellion without understanding that wound, because it means her moral transformation did not happen in a vacuum. It happened in the specific context of someone who felt rejected by the powerful and who then decided that power itself was the problem. So when she finally gets her colony and then decides to protect it, when she declares that Earth's life is worth saving and Homeworld's values are wrong, we have to ask the uncomfortable question: how much of this is genuine moral awakening, and how much of it is resentment? How much of Rose Quartz is a sincere attempt to do better, and how much is Pink Diamond's revenge against a family that never respected her? She could not be the diamond they wanted, so she redefined good to mean not diamond. She could not succeed within the master morality, so she invented a new morality where her failure became heroism. Look at the crystal gems. Look at what they become under Rose Quartz's leadership. They are brave, certainly. They are principled. They fight against the tyrannical empire, and they refuse to compromise their beliefs. But notice what those beliefs actually are. They are defined almost entirely in opposition to Homeworld. Fusion is sacred because Homeworld says fusion is taboo. Individuality matters because Homeworld says function is all that counts. Freedom is the highest value because Homeworld demands obedience. Earth is precious because Homeworld sees it as raw material. Every single pillar of Crystal Gem morality is a negation of Homeworld morality. They know what they are against far more clearly than they know what they are for. This is the signature of slave morality. It does not create from abundance. It creates from opposition, and that means it is always, in some fundamental way, dependent on the thing it opposes. The Crystal Gems cannot define themselves without Homeworld. Their identity requires an enemy. Their goodness requires an evil to stand against. Take away the diamonds, take away the threat, and the Crystal Gems are left wondering what exactly they are supposed to be doing, which, if you have watched the show carefully, is precisely what happens. In the long centuries between the war and the start of the series, the Crystal Gems drift. They guard the planet, they fight corrupted gems, but there is a hollowness to it, a sense that the mission has lost its urgency. Because the enemy is gone, and without the enemy, the morality that defined itself against the enemy starts to feel thin. Consider The Answer, which aired on January 4th, 2016, the episode that tells us how Ruby and Sapphire first fused and first fell in love. It is a beautiful story. It is one of the most emotionally resonant episodes in the entire series. It is also a perfect illustration of slave morality in action. Ruby is a common soldier, one of 3 identical rubies assigned to protect a sapphire. Sapphire is an aristocratic seer, elegant and composed, stationed at Blue Diamond's court. They are on opposite ends of Homeworld's hierarchy, and when they fuse accidentally during a rebel attack, they commit an unforgivable transgression against the caste system. A ruby and a sapphire are not supposed to fuse. Different types of gems are not supposed to mix. The result, garnet, is an abomination in Homeworld's eyes. They are supposed to be punished. They are supposed to be destroyed. Instead, they run. They choose each other over the system. And in that choice, they invert every value Homeworld holds dear. The lowest and the highest become equals. A forbidden fusion becomes the most stable relationship in the entire show. What was taboo becomes sacred. What was shameful becomes a source of pride. But notice that the entire meaning of their union comes from its transgression. Garnet is meaningful because she is not supposed to exist. Their love is powerful because it defies a system that says it should not be. Remove the prohibition, and you remove the revolutionary significance. Garnet without Homeworld's taboo is just 2 gems who like being together. It is Homeworld's condemnation that gives their fusion its moral weight. The slave morality needs the master morality to exist. It feeds on it. It cannot survive without it. Then there is Bismuth, the episode that aired on August 4th, 2016, and this one cuts to the heart of the whole moral dilemma. Bismuth is a crystal gem who was locked away by Rose Quartz thousands of years ago, and when Steven frees her, we learn why. Bismuth created a weapon called the Breaking Point, designed specifically to shatter diamonds, to kill them permanently, not poof them, not bubble them, not imprison them, shatter them, end them. And she wanted to use it. She wanted to take the war to its logical conclusion and destroy the Masters using the Masters' own methods. If Homeworld shatters defective gems, then the crystal gems should shatter the diamonds. Eye for an eye, power for power. You taught us that destruction is how you deal with things you do not like, so we learned the lesson. We are going to destroy you. Rose refused. She sealed Bismuth in a bubble and told no one what had happened. Not Garnet, not anyone. She simply made Bismuth disappear and pretended it never happened. And through a Nietzschean lens, this moment is fascinating because what Rose is doing is policing the boundary of slave morality. She is insisting that the rebellion cannot adopt the methods of the oppressor. The crystal gems reject shattering because shattering is what Homeworld does. To shatter a diamond would be to become what they fight against. It would collapse the moral distinction that gives the rebellion its meaning. If the rebels start killing like the Empire kills, then what exactly is the difference between them? The slave morality loses its claim to moral superiority the moment it picks up the master's weapons. But there is something else going on, something darker, and if you are paying attention, you can feel it. Rose is also protecting herself. She is a diamond. She is pink diamond wearing the shape of a rose quartz. Bismuth's weapon threatens diamonds, and Rose is a diamond wearing a disguise. Her refusal to allow shattering is not just a moral principle. It is self-preservation dressed up as ethics. And that is resentment in its most insidious form. The moment when the slave morality serves the personal interests of its creator while claiming to serve a universal good. Rose gets to be the compassionate leader who refuses to stoop to the enemy's level, and she also gets to stay alive. Both things are accomplished by the same decision. How convenient. Nietzsche understood this dynamic perfectly. He wrote extensively about how moral leaders, prophets, founders of movements are almost always more complicated than their followers realize. The followers see the ideal, they see the vision. They see the person they need the leader to be, and the leader, consciously or unconsciously, plays that role. Not because they are evil, not because they are cynical manipulators, but because the role serves them too. It gives them purpose and adoration and a sense of meaning that they could not find any other way. The slave revolt in morals does not just liberate the slaves, it also empowers the revolutionary. And the revolutionary's power, cloaked in the language of service and sacrifice, can be even more insidious than the master's power, because at least the master was honest about wanting to dominate. The Trial, which aired on December 8, 2017, gives us Homeworld's attempt to make sense of all this, and it fails spectacularly. Rose Quartz is put on trial for the shattering of Pink Diamond. Homeworld's justice system, built on master morality, tries to apply its logic to what happened. The prosecuting Zircon lays out the case. A rose quartz somehow got close enough to Pink Diamond to shatter her, but the defense Zircon, almost despite herself, starts pulling at threads that unravel the entire case. How did a rose quartz get past Pink Diamond's entourage? How did she get past the agates and the sapphires and the personal guard? The only gem who could have gotten that close was someone Pink Diamond already trusted. Someone from her own court. The truth, the real truth that no one in that courtroom can conceive of, is that a diamond chose to become something lesser. A diamond chose to reject her own divinity. And Homeworld's moral framework has no category for that. Master morality cannot comprehend why anyone with power would voluntarily give it up. The strong do not choose to become weak. The rulers do not choose to become servants. The idea is literally unthinkable within their system. So the trial fails, not because the evidence is insufficient, but because the truth exists outside the boundaries of what Homeworld's morality can even imagine. Their entire moral framework has a blind spot exactly the size and shape of Pink Diamond's transformation, and they cannot see around it. This is what makes Pink Diamond such a perfect Nietzschean figure. She exists at the exact intersection of master and slave morality. She was born a master who became a slave by choice. She had power and chose powerlessness. She had authority and chose rebellion. And in doing so, she broke both systems. She proved that master morality is not as stable as it pretends to be, because one of the masters defected, and she proved that slave morality is not as pure as it claims to be because its founder was a master in disguise. Both moral systems are exposed as incomplete, as fragile, as dependent on illusions that cannot survive contact with the full truth. Nietzsche would have loved this. He would have written about it for pages and pages, circling the paradox, poking at it from different angles, because this is exactly the kind of moral complexity that fascinated him. Not simple good versus evil, not heroes versus villains, but the uncomfortable reality that moral systems are created by flawed beings for complicated reasons, and that the line between liberation and self-deception is thinner than anyone wants to admit. And that brings us to the most dramatic parallel between Pink Diamond's story and Nietzsche's philosophy. Because Pink Diamond did not just rebel against the Diamond Authority. She did not just invert their values or build a new moral system in opposition to theirs. She did something far more radical, far more consequential, and far more dangerous. She killed God. Not metaphorically, not abstractly. She staged her own shattering. She took the form of rose quartz, had Pearl strike her with a sword in front of witnesses, swallowed the shattered remains of a fake gem, and let the entire universe believe that Pink Diamond was dead. The divine ruler of Earth's colony, the supreme authority over every gem on the planet, The god of that particular world was gone, fallen, shattered, and she did it to herself. She committed deicide against her own divinity. She looked at the throne she was sitting on and she decided to smash it, with herself still on it, and let everyone believe the destruction was real. Now, you need to understand what Nietzsche actually meant when he wrote those three famous words. God is dead. Because most people get this wrong, they think Nietzsche was celebrating. They think he was an atheist cheering the decline of religion, pumping his fist in some kind of secular victory lap. But that is not what he was doing at all. Nietzsche was terrified. When he wrote God is dead, he was issuing a warning. He was saying, look, for centuries, Western civilization has built its entire moral framework on a foundation of divine authority. Good and evil, right and wrong, meaning and purpose. All of it rests on the idea that there is a God who defines these things. God is the anchor. God is the reason it all makes sense. And now that anchor is being pulled up. Science, rationalism, skepticism, the Enlightenment, Darwin, all of it has eaten away at the base of the structure. And when the foundation goes, everything built on top of it goes too. He wrote about a madman running through the marketplace with a lantern, shouting that God is dead and we have killed him. And the people in the marketplace laugh at him. They think he is crazy. But the madman is not crazy. He is the only one who understands what has happened, and the crowd does not understand because they have not yet felt the consequences. They are still living in the warmth of a sun that has already gone out. The light is still traveling toward them. The darkness has not arrived yet, but it will. He asks the crowd, what did we do when we unchained the earth from its sun? Where are we moving now? Away from all suns? Are we not falling continuously? Backwards, sideways, forward, in all directions? Is there still an up or a down? These are not the questions of someone celebrating. These are the questions of someone staring into an abyss. What fills the vacuum? That was Nietzsche's real question. When the source of all values, all meaning, all moral authority is removed, what takes its place? His answer was bleak. Nihilism, the total collapse of meaning. The desperate flailing search for something, anything, to believe in. He predicted that humanity would spend centuries trying to deal with the consequences of killing God, and he was not optimistic about how that would go. He saw wars coming. He saw ideologies rising up to fill the gap, political religions and utopian fantasies and personality cults, all of them doomed to fail, because none of them could do what God had done. None of them could make the universe make sense. The void left by God is not a void that can be filled by anything smaller than God. And since God is gone, the void remains. That is the terror at the heart of Nietzsche's diagnosis. Not that we killed God, but that we have nothing big enough to replace what we killed. Pink Diamond's story follows this arc with almost eerie precision. She killed the god of Earth's colony, she removed the supreme authority, and the consequences were immediate and catastrophic. Because the other diamonds, yellow, blue, and white, they did not simply accept the loss. They did not mourn quietly and move on. They did not shrug and reassign the colony to someone else. They retaliated. They launched the corruption attack. All three of them together unleashed a combined blast of light that corrupted almost every gem left on Earth's surface. Thousands of gems, many of them crystal gems who had fought for Pink's cause, who had believed in her revolution, who had risked everything for the new moral order she promised, were twisted into mindless monsters. Their physical forms distorted beyond recognition. Their minds shattered, their identities dissolved. They became creatures of pure suffering, unable to remember who they were or what they had been fighting for. Wandering the earth for millennia as beasts, as corrupted things as the wreckage of a revolution that won the war and lost everything else. The crystal gems won. They drove homeworld off Earth, they liberated the planet, and the price of that liberation was the destruction of almost everyone who fought for it. Victory and catastrophe arrived in the same moment, inseparable, two sides of the same coin. This is the cruel mathematics of deicide. You do not get to kill God and walk away clean. And Pink Diamond, hiding inside her rose quartz disguise, could do nothing to stop it. She had killed God and she could not control what came next. She had removed the foundation and was powerless to prevent the building from collapsing on everyone still inside. This is the part that people forget when they talk about revolution. They talk about the bravery, they talk about the righteousness, they talk about the moment the old order falls, but they do not talk about the morning after. They do not talk about the chaos that rushes in when the structures of power are removed. They do not talk about the ordinary people, the followers, the believers, who get crushed in the transition between one world and the next. Pink Diamond's revolution was brave, it was righteous in many ways, but the morning after lasted 5,000 years, and the ordinary gems who believed in her paid the price. Rose quartz raised her shield and protected a handful of gems from the corruption blast. Garnet, bismuth, already bubbled, a few others. But the vast majority of her army, the gems who had followed her into battle, who had believed in her cause, who had trusted her with their lives, were corrupted, twisted, lost. And Rose had to live with that. She had to look at the wreckage of her own revolution and know that she caused it. Not directly, not with her own hands, but through the chain of events she set in motion when she decided to kill God. But Rose Quartz was a mask. The God they worshipped was a fabrication. It was created by the very God they thought was dead. Think about that for a moment. Really sit with it. Let it settle. The crystal gems spent 5,000 years living in a post-God world, grieving the loss of Pink Diamond, building a new morality around Rose Quartz. And the whole time, Rose Quartz was Pink Diamond. The old God and the new God were the same, being wearing different faces. The crystal gems never actually escaped the Diamond Authority. They just stopped being able to see it. The divine power they rejected was the same divine power they worshipped. The hierarchy they fought against was the same hierarchy that created their leader. They were free, and they were not free, and they did not know the difference. This is Nietzsche's nightmare made literal. He warned that after the death of God, humanity would not simply become free. Instead, people would create new gods, new idols, new sources of absolute meaning to replace the one they had lost. They would worship science, or the state, or progress, or some charismatic leader, anything to fill the void. They would build new altars and bow before them with the same desperate devotion they once reserved for the old altars. And the tragedy is that these replacement gods would be just as false as the original, just as constructed, just as dependent on illusion. The only difference is that the new worshippers would not even know they were worshiping. They would think they were free. And then there is Pearl. Pearl, who knew the truth from the very beginning. Pearl, who was there when Pink Diamond transformed into Rose Quartz for the first time. Pearl, who struck the blow that faked the shattering. Pearl, who held the sword and swung it and watched Pink Diamond pretend to die. Pearl, who carried the knowledge of God's true identity for over 5,000 years and could not speak a word of it. Because Pink Diamond gave her a direct order, a diamond command, one of the most absolute forms of authority in the gem hierarchy, to never reveal what really happened. And a diamond command is not a request. It is not something you can choose to disobey. It is hardwired into a Pearl's existence. Pink Diamond literally sealed Pearl's mouth shut on the subject, using the same authoritarian power she claimed to have rejected. Think about the irony of that. The great liberator, the rebel who fought against Homeworld's authoritarianism, used a diamond command to silence her closest companion. The freedom fighter enslaved her most devoted follower's voice. And she did it not to protect Pearl, not to protect the crystal gems, but to protect the secret, to protect the lie that made her revolution possible. This is Pink Diamond in a single gesture. Liberation and domination, compassion and control, all tangled together so tightly that you cannot separate one from the other. Pearl is Nietzsche's priest. She is the keeper of the sacred mystery. She maintains the illusion not because she wants to, but because she has no choice, and also because she understands what the truth would do. Imagine what it would mean for Garnet, who fused in defiance of the diamonds and built her entire identity around that act of resistance, to learn that her beloved leader was a diamond all along. That the person who welcomed her, who told her she was beautiful, who made her feel like her existence was valid, was a member of the very authority that condemned her. Imagine what it would mean for Amethyst, who already feels like a mistake, an overcooked gem who emerged too late and too small from the kindergarten, to discover that the person who told her she was perfect was the same kind of being whose standards made her feel defective in the first place. Imagine what it would mean for every crystal gem who fought and suffered and watched their friends get corrupted to learn that the entire war, the entire rebellion, the entire moral revolution was started by a diamond having an identity crisis. Pearl knows all of this. She understands exactly what the truth would do. She has had 5,000 years to think about it, to turn it over in her mind, to imagine every possible outcome of revelation. And so she says nothing. She guards the secret, she performs her devotion to Rose Quartz with absolute dedication, and in doing so, she keeps the new religion alive. She is the priest who is seen behind the altar and knows that the idol is hollow, but she maintains the rituals because the congregation needs them, because without the illusion, there is only the void. And the void is worse than the lie. At least the lie gives you something to hold on to. There is a scene later in the series where Pearl literally covers her own mouth when she tries to tell Steven the truth. Her hands move against her will, physically preventing her from speaking. It is one of the most disturbing images in the show because it makes visible what is usually invisible: the silencing power of authority. The way systems of control persist even after the controlling figure is supposedly gone, Pink Diamond gave up her form, gave up her power, gave up her identity, but she left this one command in place. This one chain, and Pearl wore it for 5,000 years, feeling it tighten every time the truth threatened to surface. The god was dead, but the god's last order was still in effect. That is how deep the authority goes. It outlives the authority figure. It becomes part of the architecture of the people left behind. They are experiencing everything Nietzsche said would happen after the death of God: the aimlessness, the quiet despair, the sense that things should mean something but somehow do not. They are the civilization left behind after the divine order collapses, trying to build something new on a foundation of rubble, not realizing that the rubble itself is a lie. They are the most faithful illustration of what Nietzsche feared most about the death of God. Not that people would become evil, not that they would descend into wickedness, but that they would become lost, that they would wander through their days with a vague sense that something essential is missing, unable to name it, unable to find it, unable to stop looking for it. That is the crystal gems. That is their 5,000 years. A long, quiet, aching search for meaning in a world whose meaning was stolen by the very person they trusted to provide it. And into this world comes Steven Universe, the boy with a gem in his navel, the child who was literally born from the death of God. Rose Quartz gave up her physical form to create him. She chose to stop existing so that he could exist. He carries her gem, Pink Diamond's gem, embedded in his body. He is not a reincarnation. He is not Rose Quartz version 2. He is something entirely new, a being who exists because God chose to die a second time, because that is what happened. Pink Diamond killed her divine self to become Rose Quartz, and then Rose Quartz killed her mortal self to become Steven. 2 deaths, 2 transformations, each one creating something new and leaving something irretrievable behind. The first death was a performance, staged for an audience designed to achieve a political and moral objective. The second death was real. Rose Quartz actually ceased to exist. She did not fake it this time. She genuinely gave up her consciousness, her identity, herself, so that a new being could live, which means Steven is not the product of deception. He is the product of the one authentic sacrifice Pink Diamond ever made. The first death was a lie. The second was the truth. And Steven has to carry both of them. Steven does not know any of this yet. At the start of the show, he is a child. He does not know he is carrying the aftermath of deicide in his belly. He does not know that his mother was a god who killed herself to make him possible. He does not know that every crystal gem around him is living in a post-divine crisis that has been going on for 5,000 years. He just knows that he has a gem, and he has powers he does not understand. And the people who love him are keeping secrets they cannot explain. But he is the one who will have to deal with all of it. He is the one who will have to face the truth about Pink Diamond, about Rose Quartz, about the war, about the lies that have been holding everything together like stitches in a wound that never healed. He will have to stand in the rubble of 2 collapsed moral systems, Homeworld's master morality and the Crystal Gem's slave morality, and figure out what comes next. He will have to do what Nietzsche said humanity would have to do after the death of God. He will have to create new values from scratch, in the terrifying freedom of a world where no one is coming to tell you what is right. And the question, the real question, the one that gives the whole show its philosophical weight, is whether he can do it, whether anyone can. Whether a half-human, half-gem child carrying the weight of a dead god in his body can do what philosophers have been arguing about for over a century. Whether it is possible to build something genuine and life-affirming on a foundation of deception and pain and 5,000 years of unresolved grief, or whether the death of God always inevitably leads to more suffering, more confusion, more desperate attempts to fill a void that cannot be filled. That is what Nietzsche was warning us about, not that God would die. That had already happened as far as he was concerned. He was warning us about what comes after. About the long, slow, painful process of learning to live without the certainty that someone above you has all the answers. And Pink Diamond, in her reckless, well-intentioned, deeply flawed way, forced every character in Steven Universe to confront that exact problem. She killed God and left her son to deal with the consequences. She dropped the weight of an entire civilization's existential crisis into the lap of a child and walked away, or rather, she did not walk away. She disappeared entirely. She became him, and he has to figure out what that means while also figuring out how to be a person, while also figuring out how to be a friend, a son, a protector, a healer, while carrying a gem that contains the history of an empire and a revolution, and a lie that lasted longer than most human civilizations. No pressure, but we are getting ahead of ourselves, because before Steven can inherit this crisis, before he can even begin to understand what he is carrying, we need to look more closely at what Pink Diamond actually built during those thousands of years, as Rose Quartz. We need to examine the world she created after the death she staged, and we need to ask whether it was ever real at all. Now, Nietzsche had a thought experiment that he considered the heaviest weight a human mind could ever bear. He called it eternal recurrence, and the idea is deceptively simple. Imagine that a demon crawled up to you in your loneliest loneliness and said to you, "This life as you have lived it, you will have to live it once more, and innumerable times more. Every pain, every joy, every thought, every sigh, everything unutterably small and great in your life will return to you, all in the same succession and sequence. The same spider, the same moonlight between the trees, the same moment and the same you, over and over and over for eternity." And then the demon asks you one question. Would you say yes? That is the test. Not whether you can endure your life, not whether you can survive it, but whether you can affirm it. Whether you can look at every decision you have ever made, every consequence, every wound you caused, and every wound you received, and say, yes, I would do it all again, not because it was perfect, not because it was painless, but because it was mine. Nietzsche called this amor fati, love of fate, and he believed it was the ultimate measure of a person, not their strength, not their intelligence, not their morality, but their capacity to look at their own existence in its totality, with all its ugliness and beauty tangled together, and embrace it without flinching. This is not passive acceptance. It is not resignation. It is a fierce, almost ecstatic affirmation. It is looking at everything you have ever been, everything you have ever done, every mistake and every cruelty and every moment of cowardice, and declaring that you would choose it all again, that none of it was wasted, that even the worst of it was necessary, because it was part of the whole, and the whole is yours. Now think about Pink Diamond. Think about every identity she held, every version of herself she inhabited. She was Pink Diamond, the youngest member of the Diamond Authority, ruler of a court, overseer of colonies. And she could not bear it. The role suffocated her. The expectations crushed her. The violence that came with it horrified her. So she became Rose Quartz. She was Rose Quartz, leader of a rebellion, protector of Earth, lover of organic life. And for a while, that identity seemed to fit. But over centuries, it too began to crack. The lies accumulated, the secrets multiplied, the people she hurt in the name of her cause piled up around her like debris. So she became Stephen. She gave up her physical form entirely. She ceased to exist so that her son could take her place. A new person entirely. A clean slate, or so she hoped. And here is the thing that Nietzsche would have recognized immediately. Not a single one of those transformations was an overcoming. Every single one was an escape. This distinction matters enormously in Nietzsche's philosophy, and it is worth spending some time with, because it is the hinge on which Pink Diamond's entire character turns. Self-overcoming means you face what you are. You look at the thing you have become. You acknowledge every part of it, the parts that disgust you as much as the parts that give you pride. And then you grow beyond it. You do not pretend it never happened. You do not erase it. You integrate it. You carry it with you as you ascend. The wound becomes wisdom. The failure becomes fuel. The monster you were becomes part of the person you are becoming. The key word here is integration. The old self is not destroyed. It is absorbed, digested, made into material for the new self. Nothing is lost. Nothing is denied. Everything is used. Escape is entirely different. Escape means you cannot face what you are, so you abandon it. You shed your skin not because you have outgrown it, but because you cannot stand to look at it anymore. You do not integrate your past. You bury it. You do not carry your wounds forward. You hide them. You do not transform your suffering into meaning. You simply run from it and hope that distance alone will be enough. And the tragedy of escape is that it never works. Because the thing you are running from is not behind you. It is inside you. It travels at exactly the same speed you do. It arrives at every destination before you unpack. Pink Diamond ran. Every time, she ran from being a diamond, she ran from being rose quartz, she ran from being anything at all. And the demon's question, Nietzsche's ultimate test, would have destroyed her. Could she live her life again? Could she face being Pink Diamond again, with all the tantrums and the violence and the entitlement? Could she face being rose quartz again, with all the lies and the abandoned friends and the fake shattering? Could she face leaving Spinel alone in that garden? Could she face cracking her own pearl's eye? Could she face all of it, every last bit, and say yes? She could not even face it once. How could she possibly face it for eternity? There is a particular kind of tragedy in this, because Pink Diamond was not incapable of growth. She was not stupid. She was not even, in the simplest sense, cruel. She genuinely cared about life. She genuinely wanted to protect Earth. She genuinely loved Greg and the crystal gems, and in her own incomplete way, even the beings she abandoned. The problem was never that she lacked the desire to be better. The problem was that she confused running with becoming. She thought that if she moved far enough from who she was, she would arrive at who she wanted to be. But you do not arrive at a new self by fleeing the old one. You arrive at a new disguise. And disguises eventually fall away. And this brings us to one of the most devastating consequences of Pink Diamond's pattern. Because the thing about running from yourself is that you always leave someone behind. And the person you leave behind does not get to run. They just have to stand there in the wreckage of whatever you were and wait. Spinel waited 6,000 years. Think about that number for a moment. 6,000 years. That is roughly the entire span of recorded human civilization. From the first cities in Mesopotamia to this very moment, about 6,000 years have passed. Every empire that rose and fell, every language that was born and died, every war, every renaissance, every migration, every invention, from the wheel to the internet, all of it fits inside 6,000 years. And Spinel stood in a garden for all of it. Alone. Still. Waiting for someone who was never coming back. Because Pink Diamond told her it was a game. Stand very still. I will be right back. And Spinel believed her because Spinel was created to believe her. Spinel was made to be Pink Diamond's friend. That was her entire purpose, her entire identity, her entire reason for existing. She was not a soldier or a worker or a builder. She was a companion. Designed from the ground up to love Pink Diamond, to entertain her, to be loyal to her without question. And Pink Diamond looked at this being who loved her unconditionally and told her a lie that lasted longer than human history. There is something almost incomprehensibly cruel about this, even though Pink Diamond probably did not experience it as cruelty. She probably told herself it was temporary. She probably told herself she would come back. She probably told herself that Spinel would be fine, that it would only be a little while, that she would figure something out eventually. That is how avoidance works. You tell yourself the lie will be short-lived. You tell yourself the damage is minimal. You tell yourself the person you are abandoning will understand or forget or move on. And then a century passes. And then a millennium. And then 6 of them, and the lie is still there and the person is still standing exactly where you left them. And you are long gone, and nobody is coming back. When Spinel finally arrives on Earth in Steven Universe the movie, which premiered on September 2nd, 2019, she comes as a villain. She has a weapon that can destroy all organic life on the planet. She is consumed by rage and grief and the particular kind of madness that comes from being abandoned so thoroughly that you begin to doubt whether you ever existed at all. Spinel does not just want revenge. She wants proof. Proof that she mattered. Proof that her 6,000 years of waiting were not meaningless. Proof that someone, somewhere, remembers that she was real. And the audience watching this unfold is supposed to feel sympathy for her. And they do, because Spinel is not a villain. She is a victim. She is the eternal return of Pink Diamond's cowardice. She is what happens when you abandon someone instead of being honest with them. She is the living proof that running away does not make the problem disappear, it just makes the problem wait and wait and wait until it finds you, or in this case, until it finds your son. This is the pattern. This is the thing that recurs. Pink Diamond could not have a difficult conversation, so she turned it into a game. She could not tell Spinel the truth, that she had outgrown her, that she was leaving, that she was sorry. So she made it a game of standing still and waiting. She could not face the Diamond Authority directly, so she faked her own death. She could not tell the Crystal Gems who she really was, so she kept her secret for thousands of years. She could not deal with the consequences of her choices, so she created a new life and left someone else to inherit the mess. And every single time she ran, someone was left standing in a garden, metaphorically if not literally. Someone was always frozen in place, waiting for a resolution that would never come. Bismuth was literally bubbled, imprisoned inside the Crystal Gems temple because Pink Diamond, as Rose Quartz, could not face the conversation about what it would actually take to win the war. Pearl was left holding secrets she was forbidden to speak, a kind of psychological imprisonment that lasted millennia. The corrupted gems were left wandering Earth in broken, monstrous forms because Pink could not tell her family the truth about being alive. Volleyball is another one. Pink Pearl, the original Pearl assigned to Pink Diamond, appears in Steven Universe Future with a crack across her eye. And the show reveals, with a quietness that makes it all the more devastating, that Pink Diamond did this. In a fit of rage, Pink Diamond struck her own Pearl with enough force to crack her permanently. And then, rather than deal with what she had done, rather than face the violence inside herself, Pink Diamond had Volleyball taken away and replaced with a new Pearl, our Pearl, the one we know. Think about what that means. Pink Diamond committed an act of violence against someone who existed solely to serve her and love her. And instead of reckoning with that violence, instead of examining what it said about who she was, she had the evidence removed. She got a replacement. As if pearls were interchangeable, as if the crack in Volleyball's eye was a scratch on a piece of furniture rather than a wound in a sentient being. The damage was not repaired. It was not addressed. It was simply removed from Pink Diamond's line of sight, out of mind. Someone else's problem now. And Volleyball carried that crack for thousands of years. She carried the evidence of Pink Diamond's violence on her face like a scar that would never heal, and she carried it in silence because that is what you do when a diamond hurts you. You stand there. You wait. You endure. You do not get to confront the person who hurt you. You do not get closure. You do not get an apology. You get replaced. This is eternal recurrence made literal. The suffering does not end when Pink Diamond looks away. It continues forever in the bodies and minds of the people she hurt. The corruption that the diamonds unleashed when they believed Pink had been shattered, that blast of light that warped and twisted every gem on Earth into monstrous forms, that lasted for thousands of years, those corrupted gems wandered the Earth as broken, confused creatures for millennia because Pink Diamond could not tell her family the truth. They did not know why they were suffering. They did not know that the entire war, the entire shattering, the entire reason for the devastating attack was based on a lie. They just suffered endlessly, without explanation, without resolution, without anyone to blame except a person who no longer existed. Every choice Pink made to avoid confrontation created a wave of suffering that outlasted her by thousands of years. Every lie she told to protect herself calcified into someone else's trauma. And the truly Nietzschean horror of it is that none of this suffering was necessary. It was all, every bit of it, the result of one person's inability to face themselves. Not evil. Not malice. Just cowardice. Just the simple, human, devastatingly relatable inability to sit in an uncomfortable room and say the hard thing. Nietzsche would have recognized Pink Diamond immediately, not as a villain, not as a hero, but as the perfect example of what happens when someone refuses the weight of their own existence. When someone says no to the demon's question. When someone looks at their life and instead of affirming it, flees from it again and again, leaving a trail of frozen people behind them. And the eternal recurrence is not a hypothetical in her case, it is actual. The suffering actually repeats. The patterns actually recur. The damage she caused in one century echoes unchanged into the next, and the next, and the next. And then there is Stephen. Stephen who inherits all of this, Stephen who does not even know about most of it for years. Stephen who grows up believing his mother was a hero, then discovers she was a liar, then discovers she was a diamond, then discovers she left a trail of damage so extensive that it might take more than one lifetime to repair. Stephen, who is 14 years old when he learns that his entire understanding of his mother was wrong, and 16 when the full weight of her legacy finally crushes him. In Steven Universe Future, which aired from December 7th, 2019 to March 27th, 2020, Stephen begins to repeat his mother's patterns. Not intentionally, not consciously, but the recurrence is unmistakable. He tries to fix everyone, he tries to heal everyone, he takes on other people's pain as if it were his own responsibility, as if the only way to justify his existence is to be useful, to be needed, to be the one who makes everything better. He cannot sit with his own suffering, so he pours himself into the suffering of others. He runs from his own feelings the same way his mother ran from hers. Different methods, same motion. Different disguise, same escape. And slowly, gradually, the weight begins to crush him. You can see it in the show. You can see Stephen becoming more brittle, more reactive, more desperate. The boy who used to approach every problem with open-hearted curiosity starts approaching them with a clenched jaw and a forced smile. The empathy that used to come naturally begins to feel like a performance. He is not healing people because he wants to anymore. He is healing them because he does not know what he is if he stops. This is what eternal recurrence looks like when it is inherited. Stephen is not living his own life over again. He is living his mother's life for the first time and discovering that it is unbearable. The choices she made, the people she abandoned, the lies she told, all of it comes back. Not as memory, not as history, but as living, breathing consequences that walk up to him and demand answers he does not have. Spinel demands to know why Pink left her. Volleyball demands to know why Pink hurt her. The corrupted gems demand to know why they suffered for thousands of years. The diamonds demand to know why Pink faked her death. And Stephen stands in the middle of all of it, a 16-year-old boy carrying the weight of his mother's eternity, and he has no answers. because the person who should have answered these questions chose to become someone else rather than face them. The eternal recurrence of Pink Diamond's choices did not require a demon or a thought experiment. It just required a sun. And this is the bridge between what Nietzsche warned us about and what the show is trying to say. Because Nietzsche's thought experiment was not really about the literal repetition of events. It was about the relationship between a person and their choices. It was about whether you live in such a way that you could bear to live it again. It was about taking your life seriously enough to face it fully, to own it completely, to neither hide from the painful parts nor pretend the beautiful parts make up for the damage. Pink Diamond lived as though consequences were optional, as though you could become someone new and leave the old debts behind, as though transformation was the same as absolution. And the show, with painful clarity, demonstrates that this is not how existence works. The debts remain, the garden does not empty itself, the cracked eye does not heal, the corruption does not lift just because you have moved on. And eventually someone, usually someone who does not deserve it, has to pay what you owed. Steven pays, and he pays with interest. So let us talk about the Übermensch, because if eternal recurrence is Nietzsche's heaviest question, the Übermensch is his most ambitious answer. After the death of God, after the collapse of objective meaning, after the realization that no cosmic authority is handing down values from above, Nietzsche argued that humanity needed a new type of person, someone who could create values rather than inherit them. Someone who could stand in the void left by the death of God and build something meaningful out of nothing but their own will and their own vision. The old values were dead. The old moralities were bankrupt. And the danger, as we discussed earlier, was that humanity would fall into nihilism, into the belief that nothing matters, into the paralysis of meaninglessness. The Übermensch was Nietzsche's answer to that danger. He called this person the Übermensch, the overman. And the concept has been wildly misunderstood for over a century, twisted into everything from fascist propaganda to self-help nonsense. But at its core, the Übermensch is simply this: a person who creates their own meaning in a meaningless universe, who affirms life in all its suffering and beauty, who overcomes the need for external validation and external morality, and instead generates values from within. The Übermensch does not look up to heaven for guidance. The Übermensch does not look to tradition or scripture or authority. The Übermensch looks inward, finds what is honest and vital and alive, and builds a life around that. It is, in a strange way, an optimistic vision. Despite Nietzsche's reputation as a dark thinker, the Übermensch represents hope. Not naive hope, not the hope that someone will save us, but the fierce, clear-eyed hope that we can save ourselves. That even in a universe without inherent meaning, we are capable of creating meaning so powerful, so authentic, so life-affirming that it rivals anything the gods could have offered. The question that Steven Universe Future asks, even if it does not use these words, is whether a Steven can be this person. Whether a boy raised in the wreckage of his mother's failures can create something new. Whether he can move beyond the inherited morality of the diamonds and the reactive morality of the crystal gems and build something genuinely original. Whether he can stand in the void and build. And for a while, it looks like he might. Steven's great project, the thing that defines him throughout the original series and into future, is empathy. Radical, almost unreasonable empathy. He does not want to defeat his enemies. He wants to understand them. He does not want to enforce rules. He wants to build relationships. He looks at gems who have been fighting for thousands of years and says, what if we just talked to each other? What if we actually listened? What if the person we think is our enemy is just someone we have not understood yet? This is, in a real sense, the creation of new values. The Diamond Authority values power, hierarchy, and control. Every gem has a predetermined role, a fixed identity, an assigned function. There is no room for deviation, no space for individuality, no tolerance for difference. The crystal gems, in opposition, value freedom, rebellion, and resistance. They reject the authority's rigid structure, but their identity is still defined in relation to it. They are the rebellion. They are the resistance. Without the enemy, they are not entirely sure who they are. Steven values something different from both. He values understanding, connection, the radical belief that even your worst enemy has a perspective worth hearing. He does not just want to defeat the diamonds. He wants to change them. He does not just want to protect Earth. He wants to build a world where protection is unnecessary because understanding has made violence obsolete. This is genuinely new within the context of his universe. And this is where Nietzsche would have been genuinely interested. Because the Übermensch is not just someone who is strong. The Übermensch is someone who creates, who brings new values into existence through the sheer force of their vision. And Steven's vision, a world where empathy replaces both tyranny and rebellion, is a legitimate attempt at value creation. It is not borrowed from the diamonds, it is not borrowed from the crystal gems, it is something he generated from within himself, from his unique position as a being who is half diamond and half human, who belongs to both worlds and neither. But Nietzsche also warned, repeatedly, that the path to the Übermensch is not gentle. It requires bearing the full weight of existence. It requires saying yes to everything, including the suffering, including the failure, including the parts of yourself that you would rather not acknowledge. The Übermensch does not flinch from the abyss. The Übermensch stares into it and does not look away. And there is a cost to that staring. A cost that Nietzsche was honest enough to acknowledge even as he championed the ideal. Stephen cannot do this. In Steven Universe Future, the cracks begin to show. Stephen discovers that his healing powers can also harm. His spit, which used to heal, begins to work in reverse. He becomes volatile, emotional, unstable. The boy who spent years being everyone else's emotional support system discovers that he has been neglecting his own emotions for so long that they have curdled into something dangerous. He has been so busy affirming everyone else's existence that he has never stopped to affirm his own. He has been so busy creating meaning for others that he has never asked what his own life means now that the war is over, now that the healing is mostly done, now that the purpose that defined him is beginning to dissolve. This is a profoundly Nietzschean crisis. What do you do when the thing that gave your life meaning is gone? When the mission is complete? When the war is won? Nietzsche would say, you create new meaning. You do not cling to the old purpose. You do not try to extend it past its natural lifespan. You let it go and you build something new. But Stephen cannot let go. He cannot stop being the healer. He cannot stop being the fixer. Because without that role, who is he? Just a boy with a dead mother's gem in his belly. Just a kid who does not know how to exist without a crisis to solve. And so he manufactures crises. He inserts himself into situations where he is not needed. He tries to heal people who are already healed. He becomes, in the language of therapy, codependent on other people's suffering. And then, in the episode Fragments, something happens that changes everything. Stephen shatters Jasper. Jasper, the warrior who has been his antagonist since the original series. Jasper, who pushed him into training, who demanded that he fight, who refused to see him as anything other than a soldier. Stephen goes to Jasper seeking the one thing no one else will give him, someone who will treat him as dangerous. Everyone else walks on eggshells around Stephen. Everyone else coddles him, reassures him, tells him he is fine when he is clearly not fine. Jasper does not coddle. Jasper fights. And Stephen needs to fight. He needs to express the rage that has been building inside him for months, maybe years. He needs to stop being gentle and be something else for a while. And in a moment of rage and loss of control, he hits Jasper so hard that she shatters. He kills her. And even though he is able to put her back together, even though gem shattering is not necessarily permanent in the way human death is, the act itself is a rupture in Stephen's identity. A rupture in the story the show has been telling about who he is. Stephen, the boy who healed everyone, who talked to his enemies, who believed in empathy above all else, has just done the one thing gems fear more than anything. He has shattered someone. He has become the thing he was always supposed to be the answer to. He has repeated his mother's violence, the same violence that cracked Volleyball's eye, the same violence that destroyed civilizations, the same violence that the entire show was supposed to be moving away from. This is what Nietzsche meant when he wrote that whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. And when you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. Stephen gazed into his mother's legacy. He stared into the abyss of her failures, her lies, her violence, her abandoned responsibilities. And the abyss stared back, and it found something it recognized. Because the truth that Steven Universe Future forces its audience to confront is that Stephen is not just Rose's son. He is, in some deep structural sense, Pink Diamond's continuation. He inherited not just her gem, but her patterns, her need to fix things, her inability to sit with her own pain, her tendency to sacrifice herself rather than face what she is feeling, her capacity for violence when the pressure becomes unbearable. These are not learned behaviors. They are structural. They are in the gem itself, maybe. Or they are in the circumstances. Either way, Stephen is living proof that you cannot escape your inheritance by dying. The patterns survive, the damage transmits. The corruption that follows is the show's most Nietzschean moment. Stephen's body begins to change, his skin turns pink, he grows larger, he loses control of his form. His emotions become unstable, explosive, physically dangerous. And in the penultimate episodes, he transforms entirely into something monstrous, a massive pink creature, a kaiju of grief and rage and suppressed trauma that towers over Beach City, over the temple, over everything that was once safe and small. This is not a villain transformation. This is not Steven choosing to be evil. This is what happens when a person tries to carry the weight of the Übermensch without ever being allowed to put it down. Steven tried to be the one who creates new values. He tried to be the one who heals everyone. He tried to be the answer to his mother's failures, the living proof that her mistakes could be redeemed. And the weight of that project, the sheer impossible burden of it, the fact that no one ever asked him if he wanted this responsibility or if he could bear it, broke him. Nietzsche imagined the Übermensch as someone who could bear the weight of a godless universe, but he also acknowledged in his more honest moments that most people cannot. That the weight is too much. That the void left by the death of God is so vast that filling it might require more than any single person can give. Nietzsche himself, it is worth noting, spent the last decade of his life in a state of mental collapse. The man who demanded that humanity bear the heaviest weight could not, in the end, bear it himself. And Steven, for all his empathy, for all his genuine goodness, for all his desperate desire to be better than his mother, is still just one person. One person trying to create meaning out of a legacy of destruction. One person trying to be the Übermensch in a universe that his mother broke. And he breaks. But here is where Steven Universe does something that Nietzsche might not have anticipated. Something that might have surprised him. Something that is, in its own quiet way, a gentle but firm disagreement with one of philosophy's most influential thinkers. Steven is not saved by his own will. He is not saved by his strength, or his vision, or his ability to create new values in the void. He is not saved by becoming the Übermensch. He is saved by being held. In the finale, when Steven is at his most monstrous, when he has lost all semblance of himself, when the corruption has consumed him entirely and he is nothing but a towering creature of pink light and pain, the people who love him come, not to fight him, not to defeat him, not to lecture him about his choices or demand that he be better, not to fix him. They come to hold him, Garnet, Amethyst, Pearl, Greg, Connie. They approach this enormous, terrifying thing that Steven has become, and they wrap themselves around him. They hold on. They press their small bodies against his monstrous form, and they do not let go. There is no speech. There is no argument. There is no philosophical breakthrough. There is just contact, just presence, just the physical fact of people who love you refusing to leave. And Steven comes back, not because he overcame himself, not because he found the strength within to affirm his existence, but because other people loved him enough to stay, because they refused to abandon him the way his mother abandoned everyone, because they looked at the worst possible version of him, the most broken, the most monstrous, the most corrupted, and they said, "We are still here. We are not leaving. You do not have to carry this alone." This is the show's answer to Nietzsche, and it is not a rejection of everything he said. Steven Universe takes Nietzsche's diagnosis seriously. The death of God, the collapse of inherited meaning, the impossibility of going back to old value systems, the dangers of the abyss, all of that is present in the show's DNA. Pink Diamond is a nearly perfect illustration of Nietzschean failure. The show agrees with Nietzsche about the problem, but it disagrees about the solution. Nietzsche imagined the Übermensch as fundamentally solitary, a lone figure standing on a mountaintop, creating meaning through sheer individual will. The crowd below might benefit from the Übermensch's values, but the creation itself happens alone. The Übermensch does not need others to validate their existence. That is part of what makes them the Übermensch. They are beyond the need for community, beyond the need for approval, beyond the need to be held. They hold themselves. Steven Universe says no, not gently, not tentatively, but firmly. The show argues that values are not created in isolation. They are created in relationship. They are created between people in the space where one person reaches out and another person reaches back. Meaning is not something you generate alone in the void. It is something you build together brick by brick through trust and vulnerability and the willingness to be seen at your worst. Pink Diamond failed not just because she was dishonest and not just because she ran from her identities. She failed because she tried to transform alone. Every major decision she made, faking her death, becoming Rose, creating Steven, she made in secret, or in isolation, or through deception. She never let anyone fully in. She never allowed anyone to see all of her, the diamond and the rebel and the liar and the lover. She kept everyone at a distance, even Pearl, who was closer to her than anyone. Even Greg, who loved her without conditions. She let people see versions of herself, she let people see performances, but the full picture, the complete Pink Diamond, with all her contradictions and all her damage and all her fear, that she kept locked away, hidden even from herself. And so her transformations were always incomplete, always built on hidden foundations that would eventually crack. You cannot build a new self on top of a denied self. You cannot create something authentic from a starting point of deception. The architecture collapses because the foundation is rotten. And Pink's foundation was always rotten because she refused to let anyone see it, refused to let anyone help her repair it. Steven survives because he does the thing his mother never could. He lets people in. Not on purpose and not gracefully. He fights it. He resists it. He pushes people away throughout Future because he has inherited his mother's instinct to handle everything alone. He tells Connie he is fine when he is not fine. He smiles at the crystal gems when he is falling apart inside. He performs wellness the way his mother performed identity, from behind a mask, with the real thing hidden underneath. But when the corruption takes hold, when he has no more defenses left, when the weight finally breaks him completely and the mask is not just off but shattered, the people who love him do not need an invitation. They just come. And they hold on. And in that holding, something happens that neither Nietzsche's Übermensch nor Pink Diamond's endless transformations could achieve. Steven does not become a new person. He does not shed his old identity and put on a fresh one. He does not escape what he is. He is held as what he is. In the fullness of it, the good and the monstrous together, the healer and the destroyer in the same body. And he is told through action rather than words that he does not have to be anything other than this. That he does not have to be perfect or healed or the answer to his mother's failures. That he just has to be here, present, real, seen. This is not the Übermensch. It might be something more honest. Because Nietzsche's Übermensch, for all its philosophical grandeur, has a blind spot. It assumes that the ultimate achievement of a human life is self-creation. That the highest thing you can do is make yourself into something new, something beyond, something that transcends the limitations of inherited morality and the despair of meaninglessness. And there is beauty in that idea. There is real power in it. The vision of a person strong enough to create their own meaning in a meaningless universe is genuinely inspiring. It has inspired people for more than a century. It will probably inspire people for centuries more. But Steven Universe asks a quieter question. What if the ultimate achievement is not self-creation, but self-acceptance? What if the highest thing you can do is not to transcend what you are, but to be fully what you are, in the company of people who can bear witness to it? What if the meaning that Nietzsche was looking for was never in the mountaintop, but always in the valley, in the space between one person and another, in the reaching out and the being caught? Pink Diamond could not accept herself. Not as a diamond, not as Rose, not as anything. She kept reaching for a new identity, a new disguise, a new escape. And every disguise eventually failed because the self she was running from was always inside the new form, waiting. You cannot outrun yourself. You can only face yourself. And facing yourself, truly facing yourself, with all the damage and the beauty and the shame and the hope tangled together, is unbearable alone. That might be the most important thing the show ever says. Steven, in the end, does not become the Übermensch. He does not create new values in the void. He does something simpler and, the show argues, more courageous. He accepts help. He accepts that he is broken. He accepts that his mother's legacy left him damaged in ways he cannot fix alone. And he allows himself to be held by people who love him not because of what he has achieved or what he represents or what he might become, but simply because he exists. Simply because he is Steven. Now, there is something worth sitting with here. Because the resolution Steven finds is not a philosophical argument. It is not a rebuttal that you could publish in an academic journal. It is something much more basic and much more radical than that. It is the claim that love, not as an abstract concept, but as a concrete act, the act of showing up for someone who is falling apart, is itself a form of meaning-making that philosophy has consistently undervalued. Nietzsche understood love in his way. He wrote about it, but he tended to frame it as a distraction from the real work of self-overcoming, or as a weakness that the strong must move beyond. The Übermensch loves, perhaps, but the Übermensch does not need to be loved. That need, in Nietzsche's framework, is a form of dependency, and dependency is a chain. Steven Universe disagrees. The show says that the need to be loved is not a chain, it is a bridge. And bridges are how you get from where you are to where you need to be. Pink Diamond burned every bridge she ever built. She burned the bridge to Spinel by lying. She burned the bridge to the diamonds by faking her death. She burned the bridge to Pearl by swearing her to secrecy. She burned the bridge to volleyball by having her replaced. And so she was always stranded, always alone on whichever island she had most recently fled to. Steven, crumbling and monstrous and broken, had bridges still standing, people who had not given up on him, people who had been hurt by him, and chose to stay anyway. and those bridges carried him home. This is not a small argument the show is making. It is not a footnote to Nietzsche. It is a fundamental challenge to one of the deepest assumptions in Western philosophy, the assumption that the highest form of human achievement is individual, that the hero's journey is singular. That meaning is something you forge alone in the fire of your own will. What if meaning is something you can only find with others? What if the void that the death of God left behind cannot be filled by one person, no matter how strong, but can be filled by many people reaching toward each other in the dark? Pink Diamond tried to fill the void alone. She filled it with disguises and lies and new identities, and every single one eventually collapsed. Stephen tried to fill the void alone too. At first, he tried to be the healer, the fixer, the bridge between worlds. And he collapsed too. But Stephen had something his mother never allowed herself to have. He had people who would not leave. And in the end, that made all the difference. Not because it erased the damage. Stephen still carries his mother's legacy. He still carries the weight, but he does not carry it alone anymore. And that, the show whispers, changes what the weight means. It does not become lighter, it becomes bearable. And bearable might be enough. And this is where we arrive at something Nietzsche understood better than almost anyone. The problem of morality itself, not which morals are correct, not which side is right, but the deeper question underneath all of that. The question of whether good and evil as categories can even contain a person like Pink Diamond. In Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche makes an argument that still unsettles people more than a century later. He says that good and evil are not fixed truths written into the fabric of the universe. They are constructions, they are stories that civilizations tell themselves to maintain order, to keep power where power already sits, to make obedience feel like virtue. And the truly great individual, the person capable of genuine transformation, must eventually see through those stories, must eventually step beyond them into something more honest. Something more dangerous, certainly, but more honest. Pink Diamond is the character who glimpses what lies beyond good and evil, and she is also the character who cannot handle what she sees there. Think about what she actually does over the course of her existence. Really think about it. Lay it all out in front of you like evidence on a table, and try to sort it into two clean piles, good and bad, and watch what happens. Watch how the piles refuse to stay separate. Watch how every piece of evidence belongs in both at the same time. She saves the Earth. That is good by almost any measure you could name. She preserves an entire planet of organic life, billions of years of evolution, every forest and ocean and field of wildflowers from being hollowed out by gem colonization. She defends creatures who have no power, no voice, no standing whatsoever in the gem hierarchy. She looks at humanity and sees something worth fighting for. She risks everything for them. That is, by any reasonable standard, a heroic act. It is the kind of thing you build statues about. And she condemns thousands of gems to corruption in the process. When she faked her own shattering, when she staged that elaborate death scene behind the palanquin, she set in motion a chain of events that she must have known was possible. The diamonds were going to respond. Of course they were going to respond. One of their own had been murdered, or so they believed, and their response was the corruption attack that washed over the earth and twisted every gem it touched into a monster. For thousands of years, every gem who had fought for rose quartz, every gem who had believed in the revolution, every gem who had given up their old life to join something they thought was beautiful and righteous, corrupted, broken, turned into creatures that could not think or speak or remember who they had been. Because Pink Diamond did not tell them the truth. Because she let them believe something that was not real, and when the consequences of that lie came crashing down, she had no way to stop them. She loved humans. She genuinely deeply found them fascinating and beautiful and worthy of wonder. She marveled at their short lives and their strange customs and the way they grew and changed in ways that gems never could. And she abandoned Spinel in a garden for 6,000 years. Just left her there, standing in one spot. In a garden that was supposed to be their special place, the place where they played together, the place where Spinel had been her closest companion. The last thing Pink Diamond said to her was to stay, to stand very still and wait for her to come back. And then Pink Diamond walked away and never returned. Never sent word, never asked anyone to check on her, never, as far as the show tells us, thought about her again. For 6,000 years, Spinel stood in that garden, smiling, waiting, because the person she loved most in the universe told her to wait, and she trusted that person completely, and that trust held her in place longer than most stars burn. She created the crystal gems. She built a movement, a community, a family. She gave gems something that had never existed before in the entire history of their species. The idea that you could choose who you wanted to be. The idea that a gem was not just her function, not just her cut and color and designated purpose, but something more, something with agency and desire and the capacity for growth. That is a revolutionary idea. That is the kind of idea that changes everything. And she built all of it on a lie. Every crystal gem who followed rose quartz into battle was following a person who did not exist. Rose quartz was a mask, a performance, a character that Pink Diamond created because she did not have the courage to lead the revolution as herself. Every gem who loved Rose, who trusted Rose, who would have died for Rose, was loving and trusting and risking their life for a fiction. And the fiction was not theirs, it was hers. She held it and she controlled it, and she never let anyone else in on it except the one person she ordered to keep silent. She gave up her physical form to create Steven. She chose to bring a child into the world, a hybrid of gem and human that had never existed before, something genuinely unprecedented in the universe. An act of creation that was also, in a very real sense, an act of love. She wanted this child. She wanted to give him the ability to grow and change in ways she never could. And in doing so, whether she intended it or not, she left that child to carry the weight of every single thing she had ever done wrong. Every secret, every abandoned friend, every corrupted gem, every lie, every promise she made and did not keep. All of it landed on a boy who did not ask for any of it. Who spent his childhood gradually discovering that the mother everyone told him was wonderful was also the person responsible for an almost incomprehensible amount of pain. Now, how do you classify that? How do you take all of those things, all of them together, the saving and the condemning, the loving and the abandoning, the creating and the deceiving, and sort them into good and evil? You cannot. Not honestly, not if you are being serious about it. The categories break, they are not large enough to hold her. She is not a villain, and she is not some convenient middle ground between the two. She is something that the traditional moral vocabulary does not have a word for, and that is exactly what makes her such a profoundly Nietzschean character. Nietzsche would have recognized Pink Diamond immediately. He would have seen someone who understood, on some deep intuitive level, that Homeworld's moral framework was hollow, that the Diamond Authority's version of good was not actually good. It was just power. Raw, enormous, planet-shattering power dressed up in the language of order and purpose and hierarchy. The Diamonds said they were building something beautiful, something perfect, a civilization that spanned galaxies. What they were actually doing was strip mining planets and creating sentient beings, and then telling those beings that their only value was the function they were designed to perform. Your purpose is your identity. Your role is your worth. Step outside of that and you are defective, you are wrong, you are something to be corrected or destroyed. That is not goodness. That is control wearing the mask of benevolence. That is domination pretending to be love. And Pink Diamond saw through it. She saw the mask. She understood, perhaps before any other gem in the entire history of their civilization, that the entire system was built on a lie about what gems were and what they could become. That is a genuinely radical insight. That is the kind of seeing that Nietzsche wrote about with real admiration. The ability to look at the values everyone around you accepts without question, the values that feel as natural and inevitable as gravity, and to say no, this is not right, this is not true. There is something else possible beyond this. But here is where Pink Diamond fails, and it is the specific failure that Nietzsche warned about more than any other, more than nihilism, more than the death of God, more than the eternal return. This is the failure at the heart of his entire project. She sees beyond good and evil, but she does not have the courage to live there. She cannot build something new in the open. She cannot stand in front of the world she wants to create and say, this is what I am, and this is what I have done, and these are the costs, and I accept all of them. Instead, she hides, she pretends, she puts on a mask, and she lets everyone around her believe a story that she knows is not true. She lets Pearl carry the secret in silence for millennia. She lets Garnet believe that Rose was a different person entirely. She lets the whole rebellion, the whole beautiful, painful, world-changing rebellion, rest on a foundation that she knows is false. And this is what Nietzsche would call the most dangerous kind of failure. Not the failure to see, not the failure to act, but the failure to be honest about the acting. The failure to own the destruction that your transformation requires. Because when you destroy old values and then hide behind new ones that you know are also false, you have not transcended anything. You have just built a prettier cage. You have replaced one set of lies with another, and the only difference is that this time you are the one telling them. The show understands this with remarkable precision. Rebecca Sugar built Pink Diamond to be exactly this kind of character. Deliberately, carefully, over years of storytelling. In Sugar's own words, this was a character designed to be so complicated and morally gray that whenever the audience might settle into thinking she was totally good or totally bad, the show turned away from that easy resolution. It refused to let you rest in a simple judgment, and that refusal is the show operating in genuinely Nietzschean territory. It is a work of popular entertainment that insists, quietly but firmly, that the most important characters in the story cannot be reduced to good or evil, that the attempt to reduce them is itself a kind of dishonesty, a kind of moral laziness that the show will not participate in. And you can see this most clearly in how the other characters respond when they learn the truth, because every single one of them reacts differently, and each reaction maps almost perfectly onto a different response to the collapse of a moral framework. Each one is living through their own version of what Nietzsche described as the death of God, the moment when the structure you have organized your entire existence around reveals itself to be something other than what you believed. Pearl knew the truth all along. She was there when Pink Diamond became Rose Quartz. She watched the transformation. She helped stage the shattering. She was complicit in every detail. And then she was ordered to stay silent. Literally ordered, with a command that she could not disobey, her hands flying up to cover her mouth every time she tried to speak the words. Pearl is what Nietzsche might call the ascetic priest, the keeper of the sacred secret, the one who serves the moral framework, who maintains its rituals and upholds its stories, even when she knows, even when she has always known, that the framework is built on something false. Pearl's suffering is not the suffering of ignorance, it is the suffering of knowledge without permission to speak. She has been loyal to a lie for thousands of years, not because she believes the lie, but because she loves the person who told it. And that is a prison more complete than any cell, because you cannot escape a cage you chose to enter out of love. Garnet's reaction is entirely different. Garnet believed in Rose Quartz with something approaching religious devotion. Rose was the one who looked at Garnet, this fusion of two different gems who had been told her entire existence that she was wrong and broken and an abomination, and said, "You are not wrong, you are something new. You are beautiful. Stay like this." That validation was the foundation of Garnet's identity. When Garnet learns that Rose was Pink Diamond all along, that foundation does not crack, it shatters. Completely, instantaneously. Because Garnet is the believer who discovers that her God was flawed, that the being she built her entire sense of self around was not who she claimed to be. And the question that tears Garnet apart is not whether the validation was still true, it is whether it can be true if the person who offered it was a liar. If the prophet is false, is the prophecy also false? Or can true things come from untrue sources? That is a Nietzschean crisis in its purest form. It is what happens when the moral foundation is pulled away and you are left standing in the air with nothing under your feet, trying to decide whether you are falling or flying. Amethyst occupies a position that is unlike any of the others because Amethyst is a living contradiction of Pink Diamond's choices. She was created in the kindergarten, the prime kindergarten where Homeworld injected its colonizing technology into the Earth's crust and grew new gems from the planet's own resources. This was one of the things the rebellion was fighting against. The exploitation of Earth, the draining of its life force to produce soldiers for an empire that did not care about the planet or anything living on it. And Amethyst came out of it. Her very existence is a monument to Pink Diamond's contradictions. She is alive because the destruction happened. She is a crystal gem, a member of the family that Pink Diamond built, because the process that Pink Diamond was supposedly trying to stop is the process that made her. She stayed too long in the ground. She emerged late, smaller than she was supposed to be, in an empty kindergarten that had already been abandoned. And everything about her, from her size to her personality to her deep, barely articulated sense that she is not quite right, not quite enough, is a consequence of the war and the lies and the choices that Pink Diamond made. Amethyst does not have the luxury of simple anger or simple grief. She is the consequence. And consequences do not get to choose how they feel about their causes. And then there is Bismuth. Bismuth, who was a true revolutionary, who believed in the cause with her whole being, who did not just fight for the crystal gems but forged the weapons they fought with. Bismuth is the blacksmith of the rebellion, the maker and the builder, and she took the revolution seriously enough to follow it to its logical conclusion. If the diamonds are the enemy, then the diamonds must be destroyed. That is what she believed. And so she created the breaking point, a weapon capable of shattering a diamond. And when she showed it to Rose Quartz, expecting admiration, expecting gratitude, expecting her leader to share her conviction, Rose bubbled her, poofed her, and sealed her away in a bubble and hid her from the other crystal gems for thousands of years. Without explanation, without trial, without even telling the others what had happened. Each of these characters is living through a version of what Nietzsche described as the revaluation of all values, The moment when everything you believed has to be examined again from the beginning. And the show treats each response with genuine respect and genuine attention. It does not tell you that Pearl's silent loyalty is noble or pathetic. It does not tell you that Garnet's shattered faith is tragic or necessary. It does not tell you that Bismuth's anger is justified or dangerous. It lets them all exist side by side, messy and contradictory and deeply felt, and it trusts you to sit with the complexity rather than demanding a verdict. There is one more thing worth examining here, and it might be the most morally complex artifact in the entire show: the human zoo. Pink Diamond asked to preserve Earth's life. That was her request to the other diamonds. She went to them early in the colonization, and she said, essentially, that the living things on this planet were worth keeping. She found them beautiful. She found them fascinating. She wanted them to survive. And Blue Diamond, who loved Pink in her own enormous, suffocating way, responded by creating a zoo. Blue Diamond sent ships to Earth. She had humans captured, taken from their families and their homes and their entire world, and placed in a facility in deep space where they would be kept alive in a state of perpetual comfort, fed, sheltered, cared for, their emotional needs managed by an automated system that told them when to eat and when to pair off for companionship. And they were completely, utterly, thoroughly imprisoned. The humans in the zoo do not know they are in a cage. They live in something that looks very much like paradise. Their needs are met before they can even articulate them. Their pain is managed. Their conflicts are smoothed away. They exist in a gentle cycle of routine that keeps them content and docile and completely unaware that there is anything else. Anything outside, any possibility of a life that is not managed by someone who decides what is best for you without ever asking what you want. It is, in every way that matters, a gilded cage. It is comfort as a form of control. It is kindness weaponized into captivity. And it is one of the most devastating critiques of benevolent authoritarianism in any piece of media I have ever encountered. And it happens in a cartoon about magical space rocks. And Pink Diamond did not want this. That is the crucial, painful, essential detail. She asked for Earth's life to be preserved, and what she got was a prison that looks like a garden, because her request was filtered through a power structure that cannot conceive of freedom. The Diamond Authority heard the word preserve, and they understood the word contain. They heard the word protect, and they understood the word own, because that is what empires do. That is the only way empires know how to love. They cannot imagine a relationship with other beings that is not based on possession. Even their kindness, even their genuine affection, is a form of keeping, of holding, of placing something in a display case and making sure it never changes, never grows, never becomes anything other than what you have decided it should be. This is where Nietzsche's analysis of morality becomes almost uncomfortably precise. Good intentions filtered through a system of domination do not produce good outcomes. They produce prettier cages, they produce zoos. The human zoo is not evil in the way that the cluster is evil. It is not destruction or violence or the raw exercise of power to annihilate. It is something more insidious than that. It is the system's version of kindness. And the system's version of kindness still has walls, still has locks, still has keepers who decide when you eat and when you sleep and who you are permitted to love. Pink Diamond's moral legacy is full of these moments, places where what she wanted and what actually happened are separated by the vast, unbridgeable distance between intention and power. She wanted freedom. She got a war. She wanted to protect Earth. She got a zoo. She wanted to be someone new. She got a lie that lasted thousands of years. And every single one of those gaps between wanting and getting, between the dream and the reality, is a lesson in what happens when transformation is attempted without honesty. When the will to change is genuine, but the courage to be transparent about the costs is not. Now, there is one more concept from Nietzsche that we need to sit with before we bring this to a close, and it might be the most beautiful idea he ever articulated. It is certainly the most demanding. Amor fati, love of fate. It is the idea that the highest form of human achievement, the thing that separates the person who merely survives from the person who truly lives, is not overcoming your suffering, not escaping your circumstances, not becoming someone who has never been hurt. It is looking at everything that has happened to you, every joy and every catastrophe, every triumph and every humiliation, every choice you made deliberately and every consequence that arrived uninvited. Looking at all of it, the whole tangled, impossible, contradictory mass of it, and saying, yes, I would have it no other way. I love this. All of this. Even the parts that nearly destroyed me. Even the parts that left scars I will carry until I die. This is my life and I choose it. Not in spite of the pain. Because of the totality. Because it is mine. That is what Amor Fati demands. Not mere acceptance, not the gritted teeth of someone who has decided to endure because they have no other option. Love, genuine, unreserved, wholehearted love for the entirety of your existence. Nietzsche imagined it as a test. If some demon crept into your loneliest loneliness and told you that you would have to live your entire life again, exactly as it was, every pain and every loss exactly the same, with nothing new and nothing different and nothing redeemed, would you curse that demon? Or would you thank him? Would you call it the most divine thing you had ever heard? Pink Diamond never achieved this. Not even close. She hated being a diamond. She hated the role, the expectations, the way the other diamonds looked down at her as something small and childish, and not quite worthy of the authority she had been given. She hated the mural on the wall that showed her as tiny and diminished while the others loomed large. She hated the colony she was given as a consolation prize, and then she hated what colonization actually meant when she saw it up close. And when she became Rose Quartz, when she thought she had finally escaped into someone new, she gradually came to hate that too. She hated the consequences of the rebellion. She hated the corruption. She hated the secret and the weight of it, and the way it sat between her and everyone she loved like a wall she could never take down. She hated looking at Pearl and knowing what she had asked Pearl to carry. She hated looking at the corrupted gems and knowing that she was the reason they were suffering. She hated all of it. And when the weight of being Rose Quartz became too much, she did the same thing she had always done. She transformed. She became someone else. She chose to become Steven rather than face what she had done as Rose. Rather than sit with the full weight of her choices and her consequences and her legacy and say, this is what I am and I accept it, that is the opposite of amor fati. That is the refusal of fate. That is looking at the totality of your existence and saying, no, I will not carry this. I will not love this. I will hand it to someone else, someone who does not know what I know, and I will hope that they can do what I could not. And the tragedy, the deep, quiet, enormous tragedy of it, is not that she was wrong to want a child. It is not that Steven should not exist. It is not that the act of creating him was selfish. The tragedy is that her final transformation was, like every transformation before it, an escape. One more identity, one more mask, one more way of being someone other than the person who did the things that needed to be answered for. She ran from Diamond to Rose, she ran from Rose to Steven, and each time she ran, she left behind a larger pile of wreckage for someone else to sort through. But the show does not leave us there. That is important. The show does not end with Pink Diamond's failure, because Pink Diamond's failure is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of Steven's. Steven spends the entirety of Steven Universe Future learning the hardest lesson his mother never learned, that you cannot fix everything, that you cannot heal every wound just by touching it and wanting it to be better, that some of the damage in the world and in yourself is yours to carry, not because you caused it, not because you deserve it, but because you are here and it is here and the two of you are connected in ways that cannot be undone by any amount of magic or good intentions or desperate, exhausting effort. He breaks down completely. He pushes himself past every limit he has, trying to save everyone, trying to fix everyone, trying to be so good and so helpful and so relentlessly positive that the weight of his mother's legacy simply will not matter anymore. And it does not work. Of course it does not work. Because you cannot outrun an inheritance, you can only decide what to do with it. And when Steven finally shatters, when he becomes the monster, literally, physically, his body swelling into a giant corrupted creature made of every unprocessed grief and rage and guilt that he has been swallowing since the day he learned who his mother really was, the show does something extraordinary. It does not have him fight his way out. It does not have him overcome the monster through strength or willpower or the discovery of some new power. It has him be loved. The people around him, the people who know him, the people who have been with him through all of it, they reach for him. And he lets himself be reached. He lets himself be held, and in that holding, in that moment of being known and loved, not despite what he is, but as what he is, all of it, every broken piece, he comes back. And when Steven drives away from Beach City at the end of Steven Universe Future, that is amor fati. Not the loud version, not the triumphant version that stands on a mountaintop and shouts yes to the universe. It is the quiet version. The real version, I think. The version that packs a car and says goodbye to the people who matter and cries a little bit and then turns the key and drives down a road towards something unknown and does not look back with anger. Steven is not running. That is the crucial difference between Steven leaving and every time his mother left. Pink Diamond ran from her identity. Rose Quartz ran from her consequences. Steven is choosing, he is choosing to leave. He is choosing to carry everything that happened with him, not as a burden, but as the thing that made him who he is. He accepts that his mother was flawed. He accepts that his childhood was strange and painful and also beautiful, and also his. He accepts that his body contains a gemstone that connects him to a legacy of love and destruction in equal measure. And he decides to move forward, carrying all of it, not despite it, with it, because it is his fate and he has decided, finally, to love it. That is what Nietzsche was pointing toward, not the person who escapes their fate, not the person who transcends their suffering by pretending it did not happen or by handing it to someone else. The person who turns around and faces the full weight of everything they are and everything that made them and says, I choose this. This is mine, and I am going somewhere with it. So what do we do with Pink Diamond? That is the question the show keeps asking from the very first moment we hear her name, and it is the question Nietzsche would have recognized immediately, because it is the same question he spent his entire philosophical career trying to answer. What do you do with the person who saw the truth and could not live in it honestly? What do you do with the one who broke the old world and then could not build a new one without hiding inside it? What do you make of a legacy that is equal parts liberation and damage, equal parts love and abandonment, equal parts courage and cowardice? Pink Diamond is not the villain of Steven Universe. She is not the hero. She is the warning. She is what happens when transformation is incomplete. When the will to change is genuine and powerful and real, but the courage to be honest about it is not. When you tear down the old values, the old identity, the old way of being in the world, and you replace them not with something true, but with something that merely looks like truth from a distance. She shattered the framework of her old life. And then she built a new life on a lie, and then she shattered that life too by becoming someone else entirely, and in the end, the only fully honest thing she ever created was a child who would have to deal with all of it without her. Nietzsche warned us about exactly this, the person who destroys the old values but cannot build new ones honestly. The person who kills God, to use his most famous metaphor, and then hides in the shadows of the dead god's cathedral because the sunlight outside is too bright and too cold and too real. Pink Diamond killed the god of Homeworld. She destroyed, in her own life at least, the moral framework that said diamonds are perfect and the hierarchy is just and every gem exists only to serve. She proved, through her own existence, that a diamond could want more, could be more, could imagine an entirely different way of living. But she could not walk out into the open and live in the world she had made. She could not say, I did this and it cost this much and I am still standing here and I own every part of it. Instead, she became rose quartz. And then rose quartz became a memory, and then the memory became a weight on the shoulders of a boy who had to learn, slowly and painfully and beautifully, how to do the things she never could. How to be honest, how to be whole. How to love his fate, even the parts of it that came from her. Do you remember the scene in A Single Pale Rose? Steven watching through Pearl's memories, falling deeper and deeper through layers of Pearl's mind until he reaches the memory she was never supposed to share. And there it is. Rose Quartz stepping behind the palanquin, her body glowing and shifting, shrinking back into the shape she was born with. Pink Diamond, standing there in the place where a murder was supposed to happen, swallowing the fake shards, poofing herself deliberately, theatrically, so that the gems outside would see exactly what they needed to see. And then the worst part. The part that is almost impossible to watch once you understand what it means. She turns to Pearl, and she gives the order, the command issued with the authority of a diamond that sealed Pearl's mouth for thousands of years. The silence that became Pearl's prison for longer than most civilizations on Earth have existed. That scene is not a twist. It functions as a twist. The show structures it as a revelation, and it lands with the force of one. But what it really is, what it has always been once you see it with clear eyes, is a diagnosis. It is the moment the show tells you with absolute precision and absolute calm what it has been about all along. The most dangerous thing in the universe is not power. It is not cruelty. It is not the diamonds with their armies and their planet-killing weapons and their vast and different empire. The most dangerous thing in the universe is the person who does the right thing for the wrong reasons and then lies about it forever, because the lie does not stay still. It grows. It changes shape. It infects everything it touches. And the people who love the liar, the people who trusted the liar, the people who built their lives around the liar's story, carry the cost of it in their bodies for as long as they live. That is what Nietzsche warned us about. And that is what Steven Universe, quietly, gently wrapped in pastel colors and magical space rocks, managed to understand as well as any work of philosophy ever has. If this is the kind of thing you enjoy thinking about, subscribing to Futuro really does help us keep making these long videos. Sleep well. I will see you in the next one.